Today, I'm in the company of Dr. Eugenia Paulicelli, professor of Italian Studies, Comparative Literature, and Women's Studies at Queen's College and the Graduate Center CUNY, where she founded and directs the Fashion Studies program, the first academic program on the interdisciplinary study of cultures, history, and industry of fashion. She is an acclaimed author and an eclectic intellectual in the fields of Italian studies, women's studies, and fashion studies. So she wrote on Italian fashion from early cinema to the digital age, fashion under fascism, fashion and film in the 1960s, and fashion in early modern Italy. She also wrote like a critical monograph about the Italian fashion pioneer and feminist Rosa Genoni, which is entitled La moda è una cosa seria, fashion is a serious business. Just for you to know, Genoni was the author of the Primavera gown based on Botticelli's painting and the first woman to be awarded the International Jury Prize at the Universal Exposition of Milan of 1906. So I'm really honored to have you here with us in this first interview episode of Italian Innovators. Welcome, Eugenia.
Thank you, Luca, for inviting me
And
this conversation. I hope I will do a good job for you.
So, as you can guess, today we'll talk about fashion. And along the lines of the episodes on Milena Canonero, we'll also talk about its relationship to cinema, costume design, and femininity. So we talked about costume design as an experimental platform in between fashion and cinema. How was costume design formed as a field, and how was it born?
Mhm. Okay, so we need to say a few words about this because costume design was first, let's say, born with theater. So we, of course, preceded cinema in terms of representation and characters dressing for the particular play they were performing. So with the technology of cinema, at the end of the 19th century, the figure of the costume design didn't exist yet, but there were experimentations with fabric, with movement of the camera, and how dress was going along, in enhancing the work of the camera. Because was of course, as Luigi Pirandello said, he wrote the first novel on the theory of cinema, Quaderni di Serafino Gubbio, Operatore, Si gira, right? In which he tried to analyze this kind of amazement, this new technology, in which for the first time a person could see himself, herself on screen. So that was completely new. So this engenders a series of new jobs, new people who could work in the fashion industry. And little by little, so the figure of costume designer was created in Italy late, we should say professionally in the 1930s. Before then, it was the actors who brought their own wardrobe. As we can see, for example, the early cinema in 1910s, Italian cinema was very, very important. Had a sort of a first golden age. It was international. Also, international cinematographers worked for the Italian cinema, like Segundo de Chomon was a cinematographer Spanish, but he worked with the male, so with Cabiria, the very important film, Italian cinema. So little by little, so it was a question also of a legitimization, because with the new art, so cinema was not also considered in the beginning an art. So there was a very strong debate, even in Italy and in other countries, about the professionalization of this kind of field. So the costume designer In fact, now if you see, you know, the Oscar and also the Donatello, the Italian Oscars, so all the awards, so you have the presence of so many people who work for cinema that are now recognized, but in the beginning they were not. So we can say how, you know, the figure of the costume designer, and also because there were no schools of cinematography, because it was a new, you know, technique and art from photography, from painting, from theater. So people were borrowing from all these arts and reimagine them with a new technology. But little by little, so cinema became an art, and then with that also the legitimization of cinema as an art, but also cinema as a powerful industry. And also the costume design as a person who could have a profound impact on the aesthetics of cinema and the significance of dress in, you know, in the economy of the film itself.
Yeah, also
the narrative.
Cinema, theater, and opera, if you want,
opera,
are certainly
right. That's very important for Italian, especially. Absolutely, yes.
So they're like places of teamwork, where the show is actually the outcome of a number of people who work in different fields.
Yeah. In fact, for the opera, you are absolutely right in drawing attention to the opera. It was Luigi Caramba, who was a costume designer in Milan. I think they have an archive at the La Scala. So he was one of the most famous costume designers working, and then he collaborated with some films of the silent period. Yes.
Also, in the silent period, we have to know that since there is no sound, there is no voice, actually the language of the body and the language of the dresses become incredibly important. So
you're absolutely right, yes, and that's why, for example, for us, it is perceived as an exaggeration, the gesture of the actresses, and some of our divas like Lida Borrelli, Francesca Bertini, Pino Menichelli, so they became icons not only for Italian women and men, but also for global cinema. So they became, so that's important.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. It's the time where
say, no?
It's really the time when the language of the body becomes the protagonist. Also, if you think about the ballet, the silent cinema, where the body expresses a language, and within this logic, also the dress becomes a part of a language, a code.
Louis Fuller, whose technique of moving the body and the fabrics, there are some examples of early cinema, like 7 minutes, 3 minutes. So it was expanded to the work of other films. So it was a very fashionable way of expressing the body through dance, through the fabrics, through the movement, and color, because they did women mainly work in the fashion industry. They painted, they added color to each photograph. Yeah, in order to,
Oh, fantastic. So costume design is really a discipline at the center of many spheres of showmanship, of languages. To go back to Canonero, her costumes inspired new trends in the 70s in London, or brands like Ralph Lauren. Wouldn't it be simpler to create her own line? And can you guide us into the differences between a tailor, a costume designer, and a stylist? What are their roles?
Different and interconnected. So we talk about how, you know, the costume designer as a figure, as a professional figure, became recognized, and also the fact that schools started in Italy, in the Centro Sperimentale di Cinematografia, so they still have the School for Scenography and Costume Design. We have to remember, because he just left us, Piero Tosi, one of the major Italian but global really maestro for costume design, was the presidente before Maurizio Millenotti now of the school, the Italian School of Costume Design and Makeup. So the difference, the tailor as a craft has existed for centuries, right? I mean, the idea of we might want to add the figure of the seamstress with the tailor and this gender, definition. So I mean, the person who is able to actually cut and sew, a dress, a suit, a garment. So it has a particular skill for all these kind of crafts and arts. So the costume designer not always is able to do that. But he need, not always, because there are different figures, between the costume design, different preparation, different skills that they develop. For example, illustration. The costume designer many times is able to sketch the character for the film that is particularly, doing with notes. For example, there are interesting in archives the notes that the costume designer on a particular character says, okay, the skirt is to be this fabric, this color, the Gucci bag, for example. I remember now Adriana Berselli, who worked with Antonioni in L'Avventura, so the sketches are very detailed that in order to differentiate the characters, so the perception of the character and what this character has to wear instead of the other. The stilista sometimes, so there is a stilista in the fashion industry. So for example, there are many kinds of stilisti, because if you think of the 1970s, the Italian fashion in the 1970s, we have stilisti like Armani, Versace, they were called stilisti. But stilista now, there are figures who work with the costume designer to kind of collaborate with the designer, the sartorie that actually makes the dress or rearrange the dress, the director, the cinematographer, the light person. They have to work in a team in order to render and to translate what that particular scene has to convey to the audience. So that it's very, very complex. It's becoming more and more complex than it was, let's say, 100 years ago. Parallel to this, so for example, there are stylists also work for photographic shooting for the magazine, right? So also that is another figure that didn't exist before. But the way the media are, of course, evolving. So you have also new figures, new people with new specializations who have the input into the translation, I would say, of that particular look or vision for a film, for a photograph, and so forth. So there are differences, but at the same time, I think they are interconnected professions.
Definitely. In the realm of imagination, we can say that the costume designer designs a character, whereas the stilista designs a style, and a dress, in a way, is also a form of connection between the cinematographic industry and the fashion industry.
But also, I want to add to this, in thinking of your question, also this interconnections of domains, that each costume designer is parallel to, let's say, to fashion designers like Armani, Versace, for example, Prada, that they have a distinct style or look. You know, Versace is more excessive and baroque, where Armani is minimalist, as a sort of DNA of the brand, right? So it's similarly, I would say, for costume designers, they're not all the same. They have their own style, so to speak, so collection or eye. Which is married sometimes with the director. So, for example, Antonioni's style, just to give an example, is a very minimalist, especially in the 1960s film, whereas Federico Fellini is very excessive and carnivalesque. So costume there has to really elaborate a language which is absolutely coherent with the vision of the director. So then it's a key to choose the costume designer, to work with a costume designer who can interpret that kind. So I'm thinking now that Danilo Donati, for example, is another maestro of the Italian tradition of costume design, because he was very inventive, not in the way Tosi. What would be an interesting also combination, or Canonero. Canonero is a fantastic, for Oscars. I mean, she created this incredible, you know, the first film was The Clock. Arancia Meccanica.
Yeah, Clockwork Orange. Yeah, a Clockwork Orange.
Kubrick, the Stanley Kubrick. Incredible, you know, the impact of costume in that film. Barry Lyndon, Marie Antoinette, very different though. You know, she has a distinct style. This costume, they speak a very elaborate language, but with a different angle, you know, different interpretation.
Also, her ability to connect with the directors is
different aesthetics. So that's important. Or Danilo Donati, for example, for Fellini, that he was creating, inventing the past in a way with Fellini, Satyricon, for example, or other films that are based in the past, but there was a reimagination. But at the same time, the intersection with fashion are very close, very intimate, because, for example, you mentioned that Canonero engendered, you know, the imitation of the inspiration for fashion, you know, Ralph Lauren or other brands. This happened all the time. The kind of cross-pollination between ideas of cinema and the costume designers, although, you know, the costume designers sometimes they want to, you know, say, okay, this is one thing, fashion is another thing. If you talk to, because there are two different domains, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, but at the same time, they are very much interconnected, and even more so in our digital age, in which, you know, there's a completely ongoing intersection between the two domains. Black Panther, for example, right? So the film was very successful. So this is all costumes, but so many designers got inspired and then incorporated details into fashion, you know, different collections. Or, for example, films like Australia, the film Ferragamo made the shoes. There's also this other thing, there's a costume designer and then also costume designer who works with the director, but also with a brand, you know, like Ferragamo, shoes for cinema.
Yeah, definitely. Ferragamo started in Hollywood. And
very, very interconnected as a field. And Ferragamo himself is an incredible case study of somebody who actually worked and started his career in Hollywood, so making shoes for cinema.
Definitely. So there's a very, very interesting connection between the cinematographic industry and the fashion industry. But from what you were saying, it appears more and more that fashion is not just an industry which is kind of focused on trends and in constant search for novelties, but fashion is also a culture in itself. And what is, in your opinion, the culture of fashion, and what does a dress or a style say about our culture, and what does it mean to study fashion as a culture, as a serious thing, as you indicate?
Yes. Okay, let me say just a couple of words that to me is okay. First of all, the fashion, the world of fashion now is much, much more complex than it was in the past. Secondly, I think the complexity is given by the fact that there is a more than ever now, it's part of the everyday life. So it's not like a special occasion as it could have been in the past, like for a special reason. It's continuously also fed by, of course, the internet culture, Instagram and all the social media. So it's part of the quotidian, the everyday. Secondly, is also global, right? So meaning that it covers different. However, there are certain differences. Let's say, for a consumer in Milan, fashion is something, has a meaning. For a consumer in Dubai, has a completely different meaning, or in, I don't know, Mumbai, or Johannesburg, or New York. So this global idea is also very complex, because also each consumer is not the same. So it's, okay. Given that, there is one thing that I need to say as one of the most important person who actually explained what is fashion, and this is Roland Barthes, the semiology. So he said basically that you have a real fashion, and then you have a rhetorical system of fashion, which means that there is something that is inherent to your physical, the fact that you actually wearing this, but also the fact that fashion, and this is very much connected with cinema, that's why I'm kind of bringing this up, is a rhetorical system, which is a representation. So which is something that you imagine, but we don't just imagine ourselves. It's given to us by what? The media, television, magazines, cinema, video, fashion film, the short videos, the internet, and the Instagram, all this created for us a rhetorical system. So that a Versace dress or an Armani dress or a Prada dress has a meaning even before I go to the store and buy it, if I can buy it. So this is why cinema is so powerful, and also fashion can be ephemeral, as you were saying. Yes, it's linked to what is current, right? But on the other hand, it's such a complex industry that has so many branches. It's been an economic force in different period of history, like the Industrial Revolution, the textile in the 19th century, the colonial empires, and then also the technological revolution of today. So that's why fashion is a multi-billion industry. It's so I think compelling to be studied, because also the label, like the Made in Italy label, right? it's important in this economy for many reasons, not just for Italy, but also to understand the tension and the relationship between the local and the global. The plurality of localities in Italy, you know, Milan, but then you have also, I don't know, Umbria and Brunello Cucinelli, for example, another luxury brand, right? So a completely different idea, or diesel in the Veneto region, Renzo Rosso. It's very complex, I think, and even I mean, the question is that as consumers, sometimes we are informed and sometimes we need, but certainly is a very important tool to educate, you know, to make people understand what is behind it, this real, and also what are the structure of this rhetoric of fashion, you know, what is appealing, what is not, what is beautiful, etc. Yeah.
No, thank you. No, this is very important also as a way to conclude our conversation, because like fashion has a semiotics. A dress creates meaning. In Italian, the word abito is both dress and habit. So there is the actual design of a dress that becomes the design of a lifestyle, but also the design of a way of being, but also a reading of our time. And in this sense, the creation of meaning, of a way of interpreting our present. So in this sense, I think these last observations sum up.
It's powerful.
Definitely.
It's an impact.
It's so powerful also because it doesn't require words, to go back to the initial conversations, because an image speaks volumes, and a dress can say even more than many words. It's just there to be seen and to create many different meanings, but also many different imageries of the modern.
Yes.
So, well, I just want to thank you for the conversation and invite all the listeners to join the conversation and to participate in this very interesting debate on the meaning of fashion and the role that the fashion, and in particular Italian fashion, has in our contemporary world. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Luca, for involving in this conversation. So I hope it can be useful.
No, and definitely you're more than welcome to contact me if you have interest in some of the or you if you're interested in some of the things we mentioned today. For example, we talked about early cinema and the fact that Italy had especially Turin was the Hollywood of cinema in the 1910s.
Yeah,
Then we talked about the 1960s and Fellini and Antonioni. They're like two great masters. And we talked about Pirandello and his novel Shoot, which is one of the first novels ever written about cinema. And also, of course, about the present and all the brands and logos that you all know, like Armani, Versace, and so on. So thank you very much again. Arrivederci e alla prossima.
Congratulazioni for your work.
Thank you.